Hello class and welcome to today's lecture. In this lecture we're going to talk about business communication. So let's get started. Communication refers to the transference of understanding and meaning from one person to another person. It can take place between one individual and many individuals, or one individual and a single individual. But at the core of what it is the transference of some understanding that exists within person A's mind. It is communicated in any number of ways, verbally, written, video, audio, to another person. And the point of it is to create the same level of understanding, that same picture of meaning in the other person's mind as it was in the original person's mind, what we call the sender. Communication is important for a number of reasons. It helps to control the behavior of members of your team, your employees, and so forth. It can foster motivation, encourage people to do the type of work that needs to be done, to do it at the level of quality that is desired. It can provide a release for emotional expression and also provide information needed to help people make very important decisions. Communication is truly a fundamental component of every business that exists and a key responsibility of all managers within organizations. This slide here outlines the communication process. And if you look carefully, you'll see that this model is really two individuals, but it can be more than that. You have the sender, we'll call that person A, and the receiver, we'll call that person B. And when you look at how communication flows through this model, you have some message that needs to be sent. It resides within the mind of the sender. The sender has to encode the message, which means translating it from thought into some type of words or whatever medium it's going to be used to go through the channel. Channel refers to the mechanism used to carry the communication. So this could be telephone, could be the air if you're just speaking words to a person in the same room as you. It could be a telephone, it could be email. This refers to your channel. Once the message is received, it has to be decoded, and that translates into information and understanding within the receiver's mind. Now, it's important to note that if you stop the communication process here, it's incomplete. And it's incomplete for one very large reason, and that is, how does person A know that person B received the message, one, and two, properly understood the message? Well, the way that we have this addressed is through what we call feedback. And that's the final line or segment you see here. Anything that can distract from proper feedback, the message being sent, being received, we call that noise. And noise can be any number of things. It can be static on the telephone line. It could be some type of computer glitch which prevents a person from seeing the email right away. It could be a person's neighbor who's making a lot of noise so you can't hear the message properly. Noise could be any number of things. In these next few slides, we're going to detail out the communication process and its components to a greater extent. This slide here breaks down each component of the model. So we went through that in the model, so I'm not going to take a lot of time to do a deep dive on each of these components because we've already spoken about them. But the sender sends the message. They have to encode the message to the medium that's going to be used to send the channel that's going to be used to send the message to the receiver. The receiver decodes the message, so the sense of action and making sense of the message. Then that's the process of internalizing the message and it generating understanding within the receiver's mind. Noise is anything that can interfere with the message. And as we know, feedback is person B telling person A how they understood the message to mean, what they expect it to mean. So channel, this is the medium that's selected by the sender. And there's lots of channels. You have formal channels and informal channels in organizations. Formal channels are established by the organization, and they transmit messages that are related to professional activities for employees. Informal channels are channels not structured by the organization. They're used to transmit information. They could take the form of personal messages, personal social groups within the organization, unsanctioned groups, teams that people kind of form involuntarily. These tend to be spontaneous in nature, and they emerge as the needs arise within the organization. We also could look at the direction of communication. So if you're a manager, you're at the lower levels of the organization, and we say the CEOs at the top level. So if a message is being pushed up from the manager, say to the directors or the vice president to the CEO, that's upward. If a message is being generated, then pushed down, it goes to the vice presidents, the directors, then managers and employees. That would be downward communication. Communication between individuals who are on the same level is what we call lateral communication. So a manager communicating with another manager, or vice president communicating with another vice president. That would be considered lateral communication. These are some different interpersonal communication methods. Okay, so oral communication, written communication, and nonverbal communication. We should be familiar with all of these because we participate in all of them as members of humanity. So oral communication, the advantages are the speed. Once you say it, it gets right to the person's ear. It's instantaneously. Disadvantage is that it can also oftentimes be distorted, or that people may not know how to properly encode a message to say to someone else. Written communication is great because it's tangible, it's verifiable. I can go back and look at that message and say, yes, this is indeed what the person said. Disadvantage is that it takes time. If you want to write a well-crafted email, it takes time. Also, you lack feedback. It's kind of a one-way communication. Once you send the email out, you're hoping the person received it. You don't know unless they actually confirm back with you. Nonverbal communication. This advantage is that it actually supports, while nonverbal communication does definitely send its own messages and signals, but it oftentimes is used as a support for other communication mechanisms. Such as if we're talking to someone face to face, we use our hand gestures, our facial gestures, and other items like that to communicate a message to the other person, and it basically helps to support the other communication means that's taking place. The drawback about that is that it can be oftentimes misunderstood, and also different body languages and gestures and facial expressions may mean different things to people in different countries. Body movement, this is unconscious motions that provide meaning. It's funny, I was watching a TV show where this guy was supposed to be getting married, and they were in the wedding ceremony. The bride was on the stage looking at him, and his eyes gazing longingly, and they panned out so you could see the entire picture of the bride and the groom's leg was shaking. This would be an example of unconscious movement, right? So you clearly could tell he must be nervous because he couldn't stand still without the shaking, going forward in his legs. It shows an extent of interest, in another person's, and it also could show perceived status. Body movement. Here's another example of that. You're engaged in a conversation with someone. Is that person leaning forward into the conversation, maybe turning their head slightly so their ear could catch what you're saying? That shows that the person is engaged. Is the person leaning back with their arms folded and kind of looking aloof? That sends a message that the person's maybe not as engaged. So body movement can communicate a lot of things. Intonation and voice emphasis, this is another thing. Someone could say the same words, but depending on what you focus on in that sentence, you could walk away with different meanings. So, I like you, or I like you. The two things could be, you could walk away with different meanings. I like you. Depending on where I put emphasis in that sentence, it could send a different message to people, even though it's the very same words. Facial expressions, we already talked about that, and physical distance between the sender and receiver. This is heavily influenced by cultural norms. In America, we like a person to be like about 2 feet away from us. When we're talking, if they get much closer than that, we feel as if it's a violation of our personal space. Whereas other cultures, like say China, for example, their barriers for close personal space is much closer to their bodies than ours here. So this could either be shown as a sign of, for example, if you're trying to communicate a message to someone and you walk up on that person and get right up in their face, in America, that could be seen as a sign of intimidation, even a sign of bullying, right? Whereas in other countries, it could be perceived differently. There are 3 formal small group communication networks that get structured. One is a chain, the other is a wheel, and the other is called all channel. So if you look closely, the chain is a rigid chain of command. So one person sends a message here, that person sends a message here, and the only person you're able to communicate with is the person who's directly above you. Okay, so if you look at the illustration here, you'll see person A here can only communicate with person B here, and that's it. Person B then communicates with person A, but also person C. And that's the extent of who they communicate with. So it's a very structured form of communication, and it keeps, so it's about control. Okay. The wheel communication, this is a little bit different. This is this image here where it relies on a central figure who acts as the conduit for all information. So I have one person, say a manager, who then disseminates information to each team member. But the team members don't talk amongst each other. Okay, so once again, this is about control as well. And it works well when you have a strong leader who's good at communicating and you have strong trust within the group that people can rely simply on that one person's word and not feel the need to seek out information elsewhere. The last one we have here is called all channel. This is where everyone in the group can communicate to anyone at any given point in time. So this is really great. It works very well with self-managed teams and where you really need to have a strong communication among all people. So if you have a question, you can go to anyone on your team to get that information, and vice versa. Any person can push information to any or all people on the team to facilitate stronger communication. When it comes to effectiveness, the different structures that we talked about in the previous slide have different benefits. So here we have a chart which outlines criteria: speed, accuracy, emergence of a leader, and member satisfaction. And you have the three different network types, right? So if it's a chain approach, speed, they're moderate. The best one for speed would be the wheel or the all channel. That gets information out to everybody quickly. Accuracy, the chain provides a high level of accuracy, whereas the wheel also provides a high level of accuracy. Okay, emergence of a leader with the all channel model is really hard to say who the leader is because everyone is communicating with everyone. The chain is moderate when it comes to, but the wheel is very high at that because the wheel tells you, hey, I'm the leader, I'm gonna send a message out to everybody. Because so there's clearly one person that everyone is going to. And satisfaction, which is interesting, the all channel group has the highest level of member satisfaction. So and that's because people feel as though they can go to anyone they need to get the information that they need when they need it. So as opposed to having to rely on some form of hierarchy. So depending on what the situation calls for, the different network types can provide benefits. Another type of communication within organizations, it happens in every organization, no matter how big or small, is called the grapevine communication. This is informal, it's not controlled at all by management. It can be referred to as gossip, so to speak. It's perceived by most employees to be more believable and reliable than other forms of communication. I would say this is probably because you're getting that information from someone that you have confidence in. So if they believe it, they pass that confidence on to you. You're also trusting that the information they give you is relevant because of their role in your relationship with that individual. Now, it's largely used to serve people's self-interest. So the information that's being passed along definitely may have an ulterior motive or things like that designed to share the motive of whoever caused the communication to start. I remember working in organizations and there's going to be a mass layoff. And usually about 3 to 4 weeks before the layoff took place, you start hearing these rumors coming through the company, the grapevine. And they'd say, there's going to be this layoff. It's going to be this department or so and so. And when you'd hear that, I wasn't sure whether to trust it or not, but it did seem highly credible. And then next thing you know, 3 to 4 weeks, the layoffs happened and they took place largely like the way that gossip indicated. So this gave me greater confidence to believe when I heard messages like this to take them more seriously than just as rumors or gossip. If managers can manage to find a way to understand what communication is taking place in the grapevine, it could help them make a lot of important decisions for the company. It could also help them understand what needs to be done to improve employee satisfaction and things like that. Rumors, likewise, while they can have some benefits, they could also have some detriments. And here are some actions that management can engage in to reduce the amount of rumors floating around an organization. One, they can announce timetables for making important decisions. Therefore, instead of gossiping, people are more willing to wait until the decision is made. They can explain their decisions and behaviors that may appear to be inconsistent or secretive, emphasize the downside as well as the upside of current decisions and future plans. This is a big one because a lot of times people will run with what seems negative. But if manager comes out and says, hey, these are the things, like the downside to what could happen and why and how it could affect you, you kind of cut that off at the knees because you put it out there as management what any negative things could be perceived as. And lastly, they could openly discuss worst case possibilities. Um, ideally in an unanxiety provoking way. Don't try to provoke anxiety within people, but really be willing to discuss the worst case possibilities. And the part of human nature is that's what people will focus on. That's what they're going to fantasize about. That's what they're going to think about. So get out there, get ahead of it, and be willing to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Email is another very important form of communication. We all know what email is. We all engage in it, so there's no point in me spending a lot of time going deep into what email is. But it can be quickly written, is stored electronically, it creates a paper trail. A lot of great things about email. Some of the bad things is that it can be overused. I've had some individuals send me 10, 20 emails a day, it seems like. There's no way to keep track of all that and stay on top of all those messages. It's easy for a message to get lost somewhere in the email trail and you can't go back and find it and you're trying to remember this important point. So email, while it's definitely a staple in communication in today's business world, it also has some drawbacks. There are other forms of electronic communication, text messages, instant messages, posts. All these things are growing in more importance when it comes to organizations and communicating with employees and customers. Blogs, video conferencing are also additional electronic forms of communications. As the world becomes more and more global, technology continues to evolve. Video conferencing once was a pretty significant activity that companies had to set up time for and get other people on the other end ready, all in a room, got special cameras. Nowadays, people can do video conferencing on their telephones just as they would make a normal telephone call. And many of the services are even offered free through Facebook and Skype and other video conferencing websites. Knowledge management, the process of organizing and distributing an organization's collective wisdom so the right information gets to the right people at the right time when they need it. This is very important, and it's a huge field. It's not really the focus of this presentation here, but knowledge management is important because organizations, if you look at them as a collective, there's individuals all in the collective, all that have valuable information to the success of the company. If any of those people decide to leave, that information leaves with them. So the question here is, how do I acquire that information, codify it, document it in some way that even if that person left, their knowledge is still available to the next employee that comes along or to other people in related departments which may benefit from that knowledge? How do I do that? The answer to that question is knowledge management. Okay, and oftentimes companies are relying on computer-based systems and databases to try to collect this information, store it, and make it available for future people. The model of media richness helps to explain individuals' choice for communications. When you're going to send a message, we have to decide what medium we're going to use to send that message. And the concept of media richness refers to basically how much of the message can be fully transmitted to the other person. And to that extent, we have to choose the correct media to send our message. So oftentimes we should look at the type of message that we have to send and then select a media that would be appropriate for that. Here are some examples of different types of media and their richness. So if you look at this chart, you can see there are some low richness channels and some high richness channels. So low richness would be formal reports or bulletins, memos, letters. These are items that are communicating a message one way. There's not even the opportunity for people to give feedback or for you to convey more advanced concepts in your communication, such as emotions and whatnot. So we call these low rich type channels. High rich channels would be things like video conferences and face-to-face conversations. And this is because we can communicate in multiple ways when we are using these channels. Our voice, our tone, our inflection, our facial expressions, our body language, all of those can be used to help support the message that's being sent. So we would consider these to be high rich channels. Now, depending on the message that you need to send, you want to select a channel that will be appropriate for that. As with anything, there's always some barriers, right? So good communication also has barriers. Here's some of the most common ones. Filtering. This is when a person, sender, manipulates the information so that it be more favorable by the receiver. Not saying that you're lying, but you're kind of twisting the facts a little bit to try to get the response that you want. Selective perception. People selectively interpret what they see based on the basis of their interests, backgrounds, and experience. So you see a situation and you automatically assume based off of your background that what's going on. This reminds me of a story that someone once told me, and is that this man was driving down the street and he had a child in the car and he was slapping the child in the face. And he was driving very, very fast and rather recklessly, all the while slapping this kid in the face. And another driver saw this and they immediately became concerned and called the police on the individual. The driver assumed there was some form of child abuse going on. In fact, when the police arrived, they stopped the man, they pulled him out of the car, and they realized that the child had fallen off the roof and had hit his head. And the man knew that if a child or anyone who hits their head, they go to sleep, they close their eyes, they run the risk of falling into a coma. So he kept slapping the child to keep the child awake while he tried to drive him very hurriedly to the hospital, hence the reckless driving. Now, why did the person call the police thinking that there was something wrong? And that's because of their perception, based on their background, their experiences. Hey, this is inappropriate behavior. We shouldn't see people doing this behavior. Therefore, it must be something wrong. Instead of assuming that maybe there's something else going on that could have an alternative explanation for the situation, making it that behavior the appropriate behavior. So selective perception is another thing that can help filter and deceive and throw off communication. Information overload, a condition in which information inflow exceeds an individual's capacity for processing it. So this happens a lot, especially nowadays with email, for example. You just get too much information. There's no way that you're going to be able to read it all, understand it all, process it all, and use it all to make those decisions in the time frame that you may have available. Emotions. It's how a receiver feels at the time a message is received will influence how that message is interpreted. So if you're in a really great mood, you get this message and you may interpret it a lot looser. If you're in a really bad mood, really angry mood, you get this message. The message may not be that bad itself, but because of the mood you're in, you take it the wrong way. So emotions definitely play a strong role in communications, and it can be a filter that helps us to understand messages incorrectly. Some additional barriers would be language, communication apprehension, and gender differences. Men tend to talk in one way to emphasize status, while women tend to talk in a manner to create connections. So sometimes people could find themselves talking past one another, or men are very task-oriented and women are more relationship-oriented in their communications. Communication apprehension, this is undue tension and anxiety about oral communication. So this is where a person may be incredibly nervous about having a conversation, and because of that nervousness, they say the wrong things, or they don't convey the message with the same level of passion and understanding that the message needs to be conveyed in. And of course, language, if two people speak different languages, sometimes even in the same language, you may have the same word, but it may mean two different things, and you may not know which definition to apply. You're such a bad girl. Well, is that Michael Jackson bad, or is that bad as in I'm a bad, inappropriate person? So communication language, even within the same language, can be challenging. Then you have what's called politically correct communication. Communication is so concerned with being non-offensive that the meaning is lost. So you're so worried about not saying something that's going to hurt people that you actually miscommunicate. You don't say what you really mean to say. And this is pretty important because it can lead to some horrible miscommunications. For example, some examples of highly diverse workforce, this communication would be garbage. Instead of saying garbage, it becomes post-consumer waste materials, which can be a whole lot of things, right? Quotas, which becomes educational inequality. Well, guess what? Is the quota referring to an educational institution? We don't know, right? Women, these become people of gender. Wow. It just adds a whole nother level of complication. So when I began to talk about people of gender, I got to start thinking about other forms of gender change and activities that people may engage in, as opposed to when I really mean women. But instead of saying women, I say people of gender. So it can lead to a lot of miscommunication. Communication across the world in a global context can also be very confusing. There are lots of sayings that we have in America where we make statements, and to us it's just slang. If you're in America, you're part of American culture, you understand that. However, if you think those same statements to someone who's not part of American culture, they may not understand it, and it may not even be translatable to them. Tone differences could mean a lot, Whereas in America, if you tend to go up on the last word that you say, it tends to imply a question, whether or not the phrasing of the words is actually a question or not. Simply going up. Is that what you mean? Makes it sound like a question. Whereas other cultures, it's different. The tone usage is very different. So it's important for us to realize that when we're communicating with people, especially people in different cultures, that the way we look at things is not always the only way to look at a situation. Here's some common examples of how body language falls in that same category of allowing for the same gesture to mean different things depending on who the audience is that's receiving it. So in the United States, all of these hand signs are considered acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it. However, in other areas of the world, each of these hand signs means a swear word or something that's a curse word. Okay. Here's some additional examples here. This particular gesture, which in America we say is okay, right? In Japan it means money. In France it means zero. In Brazil and Germany it means that your person is being rude. In this country here, this signal here, in the United States, this means great job, congratulations. In Nigeria it means you're being rude. In Germany and Japan it means you're number one. So to reduce the chances of making a faux pas in another culture, you should err on the side of being cautious, assuming differences until similarity is proven. So just assume that things are different between you and the other culture until you have proof or evidence that there's some similarities. Emphasizing description rather than the interpretation or evaluation of something. Practicing empathy in communication. Treating your interpretations as a working hypothesis. Now this is a big one here. A lot of times we'll look at a certain situation, we'll come to a conclusion about it, and that's the truth. Well, when you're dealing with people from different countries, it's important to realize that your interpretation may be inaccurate because there's some cultural differences there. So always be willing to go back, reevaluate your decision, and see if in fact you are making the right call on that. In summary, the less employees are uncertain, the greater their satisfaction. Good communication always reduces uncertainty. So as managers, we should stress good communication. We should understand the potential for electronic communication and its drawbacks. It's very important. And we should recognize that there are many barriers to communication, especially when communicating with people from different countries and different cultures. That wraps it up for this lecture. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to send me an email. Thank you very much.